While side-scrolling fighting games had been an absolute mainstay in early gaming throughout the 8 and 16-bit era, it was Golden Axe in 1989 that in many ways perfected the concept. Finding great success in the arcades and home consoles, it was inevitable that it was going to become a template for many other games going forward. However, that happened sooner than expected. Hello there, welcome to saberduelgaming, where we always take the high ground. And welcome to Alien Storm, our retro review. In 1990, 1 year after Golden Axe's release, Sega introduced Alien Storm to arcades, later releasing it on home consoles, with the Sega Mega Drive version being the game we're reviewing here today. Right from the beginning, the similarities to Golden Axe are very clear. We have 3 characters, one male, one female, and one non-human gimmick character. In Golden Axe it was a axe-wielding dwarf, and in this game it's a robot that for some reason keeps removing his own head. The most noticeable difference between this and Golden Axe is the setting, Golden Axe being set in a medieval fantasy landscape, with Alien Storm being set in a modern-day Earth with an alien invasion underway. Into this fray come our heroes, the team named the Alien Busters. Yeah, it's not the most catchy title, but it's what we've got, so we're going to work with it. The one thing I noticed about this game from the start is that you imagine this would be a shoot 'em up. However, that isn't the case. Despite the characters clearly holding guns, or at least the male and female character, they're not actually shooting. This is very much still a beat 'em up, similar again to Golden Axe. Her weapon shoots flames only a short distance in front, with his shooting a small bolt of lightning. It wouldn't really make any difference if these were spears or something. They will only shoot within a range of, say, 1 to 2 characters. Again, it's a beat 'em up, just cleverly disguised. That said, there is a fair bit of variety. Some levels see your character automatically running forward, with you then actually being able to shoot blasts forward. There are also strangely first-person shooting levels, with you shooting a continuous beam as you move around indoor settings, blasting environments and aliens, whilst trying to avoid humans. Whilst the majority of the game continues to be the side-scrolling beat-em-up style, these levels occasionally coming back into the mix do give a fair bit of variety, and like with most games of this type, there is the option for a multiplayer game as well, with 2 players fighting on the same screen at the same time, which is a great deal of fun. The characters have a number of attacks and combos, as well as having a super move, again similar to Golden Axe, and other games such as Streets of Rage. However, unlike Golden Axe, where you gather up magic to increase the level of your special, each character has one special only, but that's still similar to most other games of this type, so it not quite living up to Golden Axe on that thing shouldn't be held too much against it. One interesting point is that the main characters, Karen, Gareth and Scooter, all had their names changed for ports onto the home consoles. The new names, Carla, Gordon and Slammer, aren't a massive change, and I don't really think this would have any effect on anyone's enjoyment of the game. Sadly, I couldn't actually find any reason for this change. There was apparently some issue between Sega and Atari about licensing rights, but that didn't seem to be linked to this, so I imagine that's something completely separate. So with the Sega Mega Drive version being released in 1991, 1 year after its release in arcades, how was it received by critics and fans? Well, the first thing that was noted was how faithfully it ported over the arcade version, despite the name changes as mentioned. Certain versions and certain consoles missed out Carla's character, such as the Sega Master System, but the Sega Mega Drive was a pretty damned faithful version that everyone seemed to quite enjoy. People certainly picked up on the similarities to Golden Axe, and that was referenced multiple times. However, it certainly wasn't referenced as a criticism. If anything, it was taken as a compliment. Scores on average for the Sega Mega Drive version of the game ranged from around 7 out of 10 to 78%, so relatively consistent. There was high praise for the graphics and the enjoyability of the gameplay. One thing that was commented on was repetition, and I'll talk about that a little bit later on. The only other criticism that was thrown out there was that the game was potentially far too easy, and I can see where that comes from. The game does have multiple difficulties, but when played on certainly the easier settings, or medium settings even, it's quite possible you could complete this game in a matter of hours, certainly if you're using a 2-player version of the game where you've got each other's backs. That said, despite these criticisms, the game was still received really well, and even in 2023, Time Extension ranked this game in its top 25 beat-em-ups of all time, so it's clearly remembered fondly. But what about modern scrutiny? How did I find this game going back and playing it in 2023? Well, the first thing I'd have to comment on is that, having never played this, I'd never even seen it, I was surprised that it wasn't a shoot 'em up. Everything about its appearance told me I was going to be shooting villains from across the screen, so that initial adaptation to it being a beat 'em up took me by surprise. However, once that was in effect, I really enjoyed this game. There's something about these side-scrolling beat-em-up games that are just so comfortable to play. Once you know them and know the format, you can play them without any real stress, and they're easy to engage and play with, and that's not a criticism of the difficulty level. I mean, it's got that pick up and play mentality and feel to it that is just so special in retro gaming. I also feel the need to comment on what was said about the game's repetition, because I just don't see that. First of all of these side-scrolling beat-em-up games were repetitive, and they were damned repetitive. This game actually has a fair bit of variety. As well as the main side-scrolling version of the game, there is dual game modes, such as what we see here, where you pick one character and go in against a particular selections of villains to fight again, before moving on to the next level. It had 1-player and 2-player modes, as many other games of this ilk did, but also it had other game modes thrown within. The first-person shooter game modes were fantastically fun, and certainly were a welcome break from the side-scrolling beat-em-up aspect. Also, it had those levels where the character was free running across the screen, and then you were actually shooting. This gave it a fair bit of variety instead of repetition, at least in my opinion, certainly more than was seen in games like Golden Axe and Streets of Rage. Overall, I did find the super moves to be kind of underwhelming, especially compared to the variety of them seen in Golden Axe, with massive dragon heads breathing fire and fire demons raining from the sky as a clear comparison. Suddenly your character exploding and then running back on to pick his head up, not quite as cool looking. The problem with this is, unfortunately, it's not a criticism of the game, it's a comparison to one of the greatest side-scrolling beat-em-ups ever made, so maybe that's a bit unfair. Also, the comments about the difficulty of the game are valid. If you play this on a reasonably easy or moderate setting, you're likely to be able to complete it in no time. And there is the scope that the 2-player mode makes it even easier. However, there is a fair bit of variety, there are harder difficulty settings, and there are the other game modes mentioned, so there's still plenty to enjoy in this game anyway. Given my fondness for retro games and the amount of consoles I've had access to in the past, I'm very surprised that Alien Storm is a game that somehow managed to fly under my radar. Alien Storm was a fantastically fun game to play, and I think it probably still deserves its around 7 out of 10 rating now that it had on its release. It's aged relatively well, and as well as any other game of its type. It's great pick up and play fun, especially if you can access it on something like a Nintendo Switch. But what do you think? Is this game you've played before? Comment below, let me know. And until next time, take the high ground.